Chapter 47 Lovesick Athira. The starship Resonance Cascade emerged from behind an asteroid, engine burning as bright as the nearby star. All 6 of her Sea-Whiz cannons deployed and took aim at their foe. Before a single shot was fired, the Cascade broke off her attack run as the enemy frantically signaled surrender. The Cascade pulled up alongside an MSI fuel tanker and extended its docking port. The R4 mercenaries, fully kitted out in spacesuits and armed to the teeth, boarded the vessel and seized control. There was no resistance. From his place in the cockpit, Trig watched the mission play out on a computer screen, the images transmitted to him by a small camera on Glossum's shoulder. The mercenaries found the executive officer, and Trig observed the conversation. "What the fuck do you want now?" the XO asked. "Pirates like you are the reason we can't carry cash anymore. There's nothing left for you to take." "We don't want your cash, Blue Boy," Anfel said, brandishing an SMG. "We want your transponder and your MSI codebook." This was the opening part of Trig's plan to rescue Tenna. Using the stolen transponder and the latest MSI recognition codes, the ice hauler Eventide Volunteer could be disguised as an MSI starship. "MSI is not at war with the Nagyari officially," Trig explained to his mother, "but the Khanate and MSI have been shooting at each other ever since Sutheria happened. We can take advantage of that." The fuel tanker was turned loose, the crew bribed into silence by the very last of Team R4's financial reserves. Selborne and Bronley were particularly upset. "You know, we weren't planning to be mercs forever," Bronley said. "We want some money to buy land on Tyron." "And I promised my parents Bronley and I would have a traditional Valdemar wedding ceremony, and those aren't cheap," Selborne added. Then she whispered in Trig's ear, "Maybe, when we get there, you could let us loot some treasure from the necropolis? I mean, you're Ralpakin's kid, so all that stuff is technically yours. And we're friends, right?" By the end of the day, the MSI transponder was installed on the ice hauler Eventide Volunteer. Trig and Anfel tested it out by targeting the ship with the Cascade's electronic warfare suite. "Sensor shows I'm looking at an MSI-flagged tanker instead of a Sutherian hauler. This is good," Anfel said. "Mind you, if the enemy looks out a window, they'll spot the difference real fast." "We don't need the disguise to hold up forever," Trig said. "Just a few minutes. That's all we need." With the Cascades safely docked aboard the Volunteer, the ice hauler got underway, en route to the Ferrous Faucets. Hanakon ensconced himself inside of his personal quarters on the Volunteer. Trig was delighted when he discovered the shortest route to the Caldorix would only take a few days. "It's not all that common for artificial gateways to be so perfectly positioned," Captain Cantor remarked. "It takes about 15 years to build one, and MSI seems to be the only corporation actually interested in building one. We should count our lucky stars and get going as quick as possible." "Agreed," said Tactical Officer Roulan. "However, before we pass through the gateway, don't you think we should shake off our pursuer first?" Trig startled and ran to the sensors manager. To his amazement, Trig could see a civilian starship shadowing the Eventide Volunteer. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Trig groaned. "Who is this guy?" Despite being docked inside of the ice hauler, the Resonance Cascade was still able to use her electronic warfare suite. The EW pod swiveled in its mount and fired a concentrated beam of radio signals through the Volunteer's hull. Moments later, the EW system began to return data. Oh, this is fun," Glossum said. "We're being chased by a racing pinnace. No weapons, no countermeasures, crew of 1. I mean, what can I say? It's a tiny speedboat for slingshot racing. You know, when you exploit gravity to race from one moon to another as fast as possible, that type of ship." Captain Cantor took a glance at the sensor display, then scrambled into the cockpit and grabbed the radio. Civilian spacecraft. This is the military warship Resonance Cascade. If you hear this transmission, acknowledge. You are entering restricted space and are being intercepted by an armed warship. If you hear this transmission, acknowledge with your call sign and turn away from this location immediately. Trig could hear a deep rumbling sound above him. Eventide Volunteer was getting ready to launch the Cascade. Meanwhile, Captain Cantor was still attempting to contact the racing pinnace. Civilian spacecraft, you are penetrating military space. If you hear this transmission, turn away. Respond with your call sign and rock your wings to acknowledge. If you fail to comply, you will be fired upon. Trig and the other mercenaries looked back at the sensors. The tiny little racing ship was still on an intercept course for the Eventide Volunteer. Bronley frowned and stepped over to the weapons control station. He punched a few buttons and then said, "I've got that guy in hammerlock. We can fire a torpedo from here and get him. But that tiny little ship doesn't have an RWR. He probably doesn't know we're bristling." Captain Cantor tried one more time, raising his voice for emphasis. "Civilian spacecraft, you are approaching a military ship. Respond immediately or we will open fire." Finally, there was a reply. "Resonance Cascade, this is Radyr Solark of the racing ship Mirage. Please do not fire on me. Please tell Tenna Honora I've come back for her." The Mirage was brought aboard Eventide Volunteer, then impounded by the Vigilo mercenaries. Its pilot was taken into custody, and a mixed group of R4 and Vigilo mercenaries traveled to the Volunteer's brig for the interrogation. Trig followed along, partly out of curiosity and partly out of a strange compulsion in the back of his mind. Trig was startled when he saw Radyr Solark through the brig window. He spoke up immediately. "Hey, I've seen him before. That's the guy who asked Tenna to be his Athira on Solitaire. You know, when she was doing her turman." One of the Vigilo mercenaries, Athira, turned around and looked at Trig. "Did she reciprocate?" the man asked. "No, she was planning to ask, someone else," Trig said. Selborn, Bronley, and Anfel entered the brig along with two Vigilo mercs. They took their places opposite Radyr Solark and started asking questions. "I swore an oath to Ray, the implement of ecstasy, that I would devote myself to my one true woman," Radyr explained. "I watched and observed Tenna." "Oh, great. He's a lovesick Athira," Rulon complained. "Just what we needed right now." "When I saw Tenna escaping the chaos aboard your ship, I was glad," Radyr said. "I thought, if I found a way to catch up to you, to join whatever journey Tenna had embarked on, she might see and understand my true feelings for her, and respond in kind." "How did you get that racing ship?" one of the Vigilo mercs asked. "Took it from the Venka Urbos spaceport about a week before the Vestrum regime fled the capital. Took me an even longer time to find out where you went and start the chase." Trig swore. "I remember! Back on the Shroudwalker Enclave. That's why Vitruvius asked if anyone was following us." Radyr leaned forward, a desperate expression in his face. "Where is Tenna?" he asked. "Why isn't she here with you?" The interrogation continued. Trig, safely sequestered on his side of the glass, frowned in thought. He projected psionic energy into the room, feeling into the outer recesses of Radyr's mind. This Valdemar man was telling the truth. Over the past few months, his interest in Tenna had grown and developed into a true obsession. He was not lying about his motivations, but there was still something wrong here. Trig could sense the presence of something else. Tenna patrolled the dream world for what felt like hours, but there was still no sign of Trig. The song of the Solitaire and Sutherian gods were nowhere to be seen either. In fact, the dream world seemed strange to her in general, as though she was looking at it through fogged glass. Tenna woke up to the sound of a door chime. She froze. This was unusual. Her meals were normally served in silence, and Avitus would simply talk to her through the door. "Who's there?" Tenna called out, throwing off her bed covers and donning the first dress she could find. A Nagyari voice barked loudly, ordering Tenna to stand with her back against the wall. Minutes later, 2 Nagyari soldiers were escorting Tenna down a corridor. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, but that did not stop Tenna from looking around. At least for a few moments, she felt like her old self again, excited to see anything to do with Malum Ralpakin or the Horde. She peered into every room and station as she was marched through the vessel. Finally, she was led to a doorway where Alex Camber was waiting. He looked down at her with an unreadable expression. "You again?" Tenna groaned. "What the fuck do you want?" "I would refrain from such coarse language," Alex said. "I have been more than hospitable to you, considering the last time we met you attacked me. Now, we must talk. Soldier, if you don't mind." One of the soldiers roughly grabbed Tenna and pushed her into the room ahead of Alex. The next chamber was very Spartan. It contained nothing except for an elevated metal slab and 2 hooks on the wall. Tenna instantly recognized what this room was and started to fight, straining against her captors and screaming. The soldier grabbed Tenna around the torso and lifted her up. As she screamed and protested, Tenna was placed on the hooks, with one metal shaft under each armpit. Her feet just barely touched the floor, and all of her weight was on the hooks. Grunting from the effort, the soldier grabbed each metal pole and bent it upwards. Her hands still shackled, Tenna was unable to get down on her own. Then Alex and the soldiers left the room, ignoring Tenna's anguished screams. Moments later, Alex's voice sounded from a speaker in the ceiling. Tenna could see it between 2 of the lights. "Honora, think about Trig Shepminter." Tenna could feel psionic energy permeating the room. Heart thudding madly, Tenna shut her eyes and concentrated on closing off her mind to Alex. A rhythmic humming sound came from the floor as the artificial gravity generator powered up. "Resistance will be punished. Compliance will be rewarded," Alex's voice called out. "Think about Trig Shepminter." An invisible force began pushing down on Tenna's body. As she was exposed to stronger and stronger gravity, Tenna struggled to breathe and to cope with the incredible pain of being suspended by her arms. Sharp, piercing pain rocketed through her shoulders and into her neck. Tenna's feet pressed into the floor, and a whole new kind of agony rippled up her legs. "Let the boy be the only thing on your mind." Alex telepathically projected his words into Tenna's mind. "In fact, you should call him for help. Go on, say his name. Beg your Athira to come for you." Hundreds of light years away, aboard the starship Eventide Volunteer, Trig awoke from a deep sleep, drenched in cold sweat and screaming Tenna's name. Slowly at first, then all at once, the pain began to subside. Someone lifted Tenna off the hooks, treating her in an unexpectedly gentle fashion. Somewhere in the deepest layer of her consciousness, Tenna felt the tiniest bit of satisfaction. She knew, and had known for a long time, that the Great Khan had a habit of heavily rewarding those who cooperated with the Horde. On the surface, Tenna felt terrible for giving in to Alex Camber's demands, but she also dared to hope that Alex would follow Malum's example just this once.